No, ma'am. See, that's not how this works. You don't get to wander up out of the dark in a dirty shirt and tell me you need the TOC. This is a restricted military compound, not a bus stop. Whoever told you that lied to you, and they had a good laugh doing it. The first light had not yet cleared the eastern mountains, and the entry control point sat in that gray hour where the desert gives up its cold slowly, and the wire fences look like pencil lines drawn against a pale sky. Lance Corporal Dane Vickers stood inside the sandbagged lane with his weapon slung across his chest and his chin up, 18 days into his first deployment, and hungry, the way new men are hungry, to be hard in front of someone. The woman on the far side of the wire had walked up out of the open ground on foot, alone, no vehicle behind her, no dust cloud, no escort, as though the country itself had set her down at his gate. She stopped at the wire and let his words land, and did nothing with them. She did not argue. She did not step closer or step back. She stood with her hands loose at her sides and her weight even on both feet, and she said, in a voice with no heat in it at all, "I need you to raise the battle captain on the command net. That's all. One call." Vickers laughed, and the laugh was for the benefit of the Marine behind him, Private First Class Toby Renfro, who had wandered over from the guard tent with a cup of instant coffee going cold in his hand. "She needs me to raise the battle captain," Vickers said over his shoulder. "You hear that? Walks up in the dark and starts naming our people." She wore a faded blue field shirt gone almost gray with dust, trousers worn pale at the knee, boots that had been good boots 1,000 kilometers ago. There was no badge on a lanyard at her chest, no unit patch on her sleeve, no rank anywhere on her, nothing for a young Marine to read and snap to, and the absence of all those things was, to Vickers, the whole problem. People who belonged had things that said so. This one had a name she would not stop offering, and a request that sounded, the more he turned it over, like a threat. She had crossed 40 kilometers of bad country to stand at this wire, and she stood at it the way other people stand in line for coffee. From the shade of the guard shack, Gunnery Sergeant Roman Sayer watched and said nothing yet. Sayer had 11 years in the Marine Corps and 3 deployments stacked behind his eyes, and he had learned to read a gate the way a farmer reads weather. He read the woman in about 2 seconds, and the reading bothered him. She was not afraid. That was the thing. People who came up to a hostile gate in a war zone were afraid, or they were trying to look unafraid, and you could see the work of it in their hands and their throat. This woman was simply, completely unbothered, and in Sayer's experience, there were only 2 kinds of people who stood like that at a gate like this. One kind was a fool. The other kind he did not have a comfortable word for. "Ma'am," Vickers said, drawing the word out, "I'm going to need you to understand the position you're in. You've got no ID, no orders, no reason to be here that I can see. So unless you start telling me the truth real quick, you and I are going to have a long morning." "I'm telling you the truth," she said. "Raise the TOC. Pass them my name and one word. After that, this stops being your problem and becomes someone else's. Your name and one word." Vickers grinned at Renfro again. "She's got a password." "I have an authentication," she said. "There's a difference, and the difference is exactly why you should make the call." That was the moment the morning tipped. Vickers heard the word frequency in his head, where she had not even said it yet, heard authentication, heard a civilian in a dirty shirt using the language of his radios, and decided, the way frightened young men decide, that the safest thing a hard man could do was to get harder. He reached to the kit on his vest and pulled a flex cuff free and snapped it once in the cold air, the plastic singing, grinning at her to see if the sound moved her. It didn't move her. She looked at the cuff, and then she looked at him, and without being told, without a word, she crossed her wrists in front of her and held them out toward the wire, palms up, thumbs turned, offering them to him as cleanly as a person handing over a tool. Sayer came off the wall of the shack one slow step, frowning, because that small thing was wrong in a way he could not yet name. The flex cuff went on. Vickers cinched it harder than he needed to, watching her face for the wince, and the wince did not come. What Sayer saw, standing now at the corner of the shack with his coffee forgotten, was the way she had offered the wrists, crossed already, palms out, thumbs up, so the plastic strap seated clean and fast against the bones, where it would not bite a tendon. Nobody did that. Nobody held their hands out to be cuffed in that exact economical way, unless they had been cuffed before, more than once, and had learned from the inside that there is a right way to make it quick and a wrong way that costs you a numb hand for an hour. Now where, Sayer murmured, mostly to himself, did a lost contractor learn to do that? The woman did not look at Sayer, but something in the set of her shoulders said she had heard him and that she had filed him, the one watching man, in whatever quiet ledger she kept. "Lance Corporal," she said, still in that level voice, "I'm going to give you a procedure. You don't have to believe a word of it. You just have to key a handset, raise the TOC on the command net, pass the battle captain my name, then pass him the authentication word. He'll have a priority flag against my call sign, and when he sees it, he will tell you exactly what to do next." She paused. "You don't have to trust me. You have to make one call, and then it stops being yours to carry." Vickers stared at her. Everything she said was correct. That was what curdled in him. She named the net the way someone names a street they grew up on. She knew there was a battle captain, and not just a vague officer. She knew the word priority and the word flag, and she fit them together in the right order. To a frightened 19-year-old, it did not sound like proof she belonged. It sounded like proof she had been studying his gait, that someone had coached her, that she was exactly the kind of probe the briefings warned about, a person who learns your language so she can walk through your wire wearing it. "You've been casing us," he said. It came out of him half question, half accusation, and once it was out, he believed it, because believing it was easier than the alternative. "No," she said simply. "I've been walking for 2 days. Make the call." She had nothing for him to confiscate. That was another thing that gnawed at Renfro, who had drifted close enough now to look her over and find nothing to look at. No bag, no phone in her hand, no weapon visible, no documents, no gear. A person with a bag full of equipment would have made sense to him. A person with nothing at all, who knew everything, made the back of his neck cold. Sayer drifted in along the wire, closer, reading her the way you read a track in soft ground. He read her boots, the wear pattern of someone who walked enormous distances and knew how to do it. He read the old white seam of a scar that ran up into her hairline, a wound long healed. He read her hands, still and patient in the cuff. And most of all, he read her eyes, because her eyes were doing the thing he had only ever seen trained people do at a gate. They had already found the crew-served weapon in the fighting position to the north, already found both guard posts, already traced the line of the antenna farm rising over the TOC 200 meters back, already mapped the whole little fortress, and filed where every dangerous thing in it stood. She was not casing the gate to attack it. She was reading it the way a professional cannot help reading a room, and Sayer had been around exactly enough operators in his career to know the difference in his gut even before his head caught up. He almost reached for his own radio then. His hand actually moved toward the handset clipped at his shoulder. But a logistics truck ground up the access lane behind them and laid on its horn for the gate, and Sayer turned to wave it into the holding area and deal with its manifest. And the moment slid past him, and the handset stayed in its cradle, and the woman stayed in her cuffs, and the morning rolled on toward the thing it was going to become. Word travels on a slow deployment, the way water finds a low place. By the time the logistics truck had been waved through, 2 more Marines had drifted up from the guard tent to see the contractor who had gotten herself flex-cuffed at first light, and Vickers, who 20 minutes earlier had been a bored sentry, found himself with an audience. And an audience is a terrible thing to hand a frightened young man. It was Renfro who coined the name. "The analyst," he said, looking her up and down, delighted with himself. "Look at her. Walks up out of nowhere quoting our comms plan. She's somebody's analyst, who wandered off the FOB next door and got herself lost in the war." The little crowd laughed, and the name stuck the way a cruel nickname always sticks. And within a minute, they were all using it. The analyst. The analyst. Hanging it on her like a leash and giving it small jerks to watch her move. "Tell you what," Vickers said, and there was a decision in it. He unlatched the gate of the wire detainee pen that sat off to the side of the lane, a square cage of chain link and concertina the size of a small room, where they held the rare, detained local until the right people came for him, and he gestured into it with a flourish. "You're cleared, you're processed, and you're out of my hair. In you go. For your safety." He said for your safety the way men say it when they mean the opposite. She walked into the pen. She did not protest, did not slow, did not look at the crowd. The chain-link door rattled shut behind her, and Vickers dropped the latch and stepped back to admire it, and the Marines laughed, and Vickers said, loud, performing now, fully, "There you go. Do you like your new home? Nice and clean, out of the weather. You can brief the fence." Inside the cage, the woman turned, unhurried, and looked back at them through the wire, and there was nothing in her face, not anger, not fear, not shame. She looked at them the way you look at weather you cannot change. A phone came up out of someone's pocket, turned sideways, the small red light of a camera, and the woman, who had stood without flinching through the cuff and the cage and the nickname, turned her face a precise 1/4 inch, just enough to take it out of the frame. It was not the flinch of someone embarrassed to be filmed. Sayer, watching from the lane, caught it and felt his stomach drop, because it was the small, automatic, trained turn of a person who is not permitted to be photographed, whose face is supposed to exist in no one's phone, a habit worn so deep it fired before thought. He had seen it exactly twice before in his career, both times on men whose names he had never been told. "Put the phone away," Sayer said, sharper than he meant to, and the Marine put the phone away, surprised, and the gunny could not have said in that moment why it mattered so much, only that it did. They wanted a reaction from her, and they got stillness, and stillness made them louder, the way a crowd always gets louder at a thing that will not perform for it. They rattled the wire. They asked her how the fence was treating her, and inside the cage, the woman used the only thing she had, which was time. She watched the rotation of the guard, 2 up, 1 resting, the interval steady. She counted in her head the rhythm of the radio traffic she could just hear from the shack, the periodic checks, the cadence of a TOC running a quiet morning. She watched for the one thing she was waiting for, which was the single adult in the place finally walking to a handset and keying it, and she settled in to wait for it with the bottomless patience of someone who has waited out far worse than a chain-link pen. They thought the cage was a punishment. She thought of it as cover, and the difference between those two thoughts was the whole story. Sayer crossed to Vickers and put his back to the crowd so the words were only between them. "Ease off," he said. "Low. Raise the TOC and clear it. Just clear it. 5 minutes, and this is over either way." Vickers, lit up by his audience, by the wire, by the morning that had finally given him a part to play, lifted his chin at his sergeant of the guard, "I'll raise it," he said, "when I'm good and ready." And he turned back to the cage to say something else clever to the analyst, and Sayer stood there with the cold spreading in his chest and made himself a private promise that if the boy did not key that radio in the next 2 minutes, the gunny would do it himself, and never mind the boy's pride. Inside the cage, the woman closed her eyes for exactly 5 seconds. Not slumping, not despairing, simply resting. The deliberate, practiced rest of someone who has learned across a hard life that rest itself is a weapon, and that you take it where you find it, even standing in a cage at a stranger's gate. And Sayer, watching that, felt the hair stand up along both his forearms. If you have ever watched someone in a uniform mistake a loud voice for authority, stay with this one and subscribe to the Veteran Vault. It stopped being a joke when a staff sergeant from the guard mount came down the lane to see what the crowd was about, and decided, with the special certainty of a man who wants a problem to be simple, that an unidentified female on the wire who knew the camp's comms plan was not a harmless lost contractor at all, but a force protection problem, and that the correct response to a force protection problem was force. "You want to explain to me," Vickers said, emboldened now by the staff sergeant's nod, stepping back to the cage, "how a civilian knows our command frequency. Because from where I'm standing, you didn't get lost. You've been casing my gate, and you just told me so with your own mouth." His voice had climbed. Underneath the bravado, if you knew how to listen, there was real fear now. Because if she was a probe, then he had been standing flat-footed in front of a threat for half an hour and laughing, and that thought frightened him more than the threat itself, and a frightened young man with an audience reaches, every time, for harder. They brought her out of the pen for a search. It was rough, hands too quick, too hard, the search of men who have decided in advance what they will find. The woman gave them nothing to fight against. She went exactly as loose or as solid as kept it fast, turned when the grip turned her, raised her cuffed wrists when they wanted them raised, and through all of it, there was not one wasted motion in her body, and not one flicker of fear in her face, and the not fear unsettled the Marines doing the searching more than any struggle could have. You can do something with a person who fights you. You do not know what to do with a person who simply lets you and watches you while you do it, and is plainly not the one in danger. "There's nothing on her," Renfro said, almost complaining. "Gunny, there's nothing on her at all." And that absence was the loudest thing at the gate, though none of them had the ears to hear it that way. A probe sent to case a wire carries things, a phone to photograph the positions, a notebook, a marked map, a reason. A lost civilian carries the wreckage of a normal life, a wallet, keys to a door on the other side of the world, a picture of someone. This woman carried neither the tools of a threat nor the litter of an ordinary person, and the only kind of human being who arrives at a war zone gate carrying absolutely nothing is the kind who has been trained, across years, to be able to vanish completely and leave no one anything to find. Sayer understood that in his bones, and could not make the others understand it, because it was a thing you learned only by standing close to people who lived that way, and these boys had never stood close to anything but their own certainty. She turned her head toward Vickers then, and spoke, low, just for him, the way you talk a man down off a ledge he does not know he is standing on. "Lance Corporal, listen to me carefully, because I am only going to say it kindly once. The longer that handset stays in its cradle, the worse this gets. And it gets worse for you. Not for me. There is a recorded net 30 meters from where you're standing, and everything that happens at this gate is on it. And right now, you still have time to be the Marine who raised the TOC and cleared it. In 5 more minutes, You will be something else on that recording. Make the call." She had not raised her voice. She had not threatened him with her body or her words. She had told him, simply and accurately, the shape of the next 5 minutes. And because every other thing she had said had turned out to be precisely true, the accuracy of it was the most frightening thing he had ever heard. Vickers heard a threat. Sayer, 3 feet away, heard an operator, heard the unmistakable cadence of someone who had stood in 100 worse rooms than this and walked every one of them down, and who was, right now, trying to walk a teenager away from the worst mistake of his life. It was too much for Vickers. The fear took the wheel. His hand went to his holster, and the pistol came out, not raised, but out, held low and angled at the ground near her feet, his hand not quite steady, his jaw set hard to cover the shake. "You stop talking," he said. "You stop naming things. You don't move." The crowd went quiet. The Marines who had been laughing looked away, the way men look away from a thing they know is wrong, but will not be the one to stop. And the looking away was its own small shame spreading through them. Sayer crossed the distance in 2 steps. He did not shout. He put one flat hand on the top of the pistol and pressed it down, all the way down, toward the dirt, and put his face 6 inches from Vickers' face, and his voice when it came was the quietest and most dangerous thing on the wire. "You raise the TOC," Sayer said. "Right now, before you do something that ends you. Look at me, Lance Corporal. Holster that weapon, and you raise the battle captain, and you do it this second." And for the first time all morning, Dane Vickers looked unsure, looked, under the hardness, exactly as young as he was. And the pistol came down, and the cold certainty he had been riding since first light cracked straight down the middle. Sayer took it out of the boy's hands. He stepped back, keyed his own radio, the handset clipped at his shoulder, the one that had stayed quiet too long, and he called the TOC himself. And the moment he passed the woman's name and the single word she had given him, the temperature of the entire morning changed. "TOC, Guard 1, Sayer said, flat and professional, reading the word off the back of his glove where he had written it when she first said it, because some instinct older than his doubt had told him to write it down. "I have an unidentified female at the ECP claiming priority access. She has provided a name and an authentication word and is requesting the battle captain. Name to follow." He passed it. Then he passed the word, slow, letter by letter. There was a pause on the net. It was too long a pause. It was the kind of pause that does not mean a man is looking something up. It is the kind of pause that means a man has just stood up from his chair. The whole gate seemed to lean into the silence of the radio. Then Captain Neil Abernathy's voice came back, and it was a different voice than the one that ran the morning's routine traffic. Careful now, deliberate, each word set down like a man crossing ice. "Guard 1, TOC, say again her name, and say again the word, slowly, and Guard 1, do nothing until I call you back. Confirm." "TOC, Guard 1, confirm, holding," Sayer said, and he lowered the handset slowly, and he turned and looked at the woman standing cuffed in the cold light with new eyes entirely. He did not say anything to the crowd. He walked past Vickers, past Renfro, straight to the wire pen, and he reached up and lifted the latch and opened the chain-link door, a small motion, the work of 1 second, and at the same time an enormous thing. A sergeant of the guard unlocking a person his own gate had just caged. Vickers found his voice somewhere and asked what he was doing. Sayer did not answer him. The woman stepped out of the open door and stood beside Sayer, her wrist still bound in front of her, and looked at him for a moment, with something that was almost warmth. 11 years, she asked quietly. Sayer blinked. 12. In March. It shows, she said. You're the only one here who's been listening." She tipped her head a fraction toward the cuffs. "You don't have to cut these yet. Not until your captain says so. I won't make you choose between me and your procedure. You've earned better than that." Sayer turned to Vickers and Renfro and the rest, and his voice was iron now. "All of you, stand down. Step back. Say nothing. Whatever happens in the next few minutes is going onto the recording, and you are going to want your part of it to be short and quiet. Do you understand me? Short and quiet." What the young Marine at the gate did not understand is what the next 10 minutes were about to teach him. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Inside the TOC, a hand mic was lifted from its hook, and a colonel who had been bent over a map looked up at the name the battle captain had just carried to him and asked one short question into the radio. "Where is she right now?" And across the whole net, the morning went very, very quiet. To understand why a colonel stood up so fast, you have to leave the gate and the gray morning and go back 12 years to a place on the other side of the world and the cold edge of a different war, because that is the only place the rest of this story lives. The mountains then were white to the spine, and the air at altitude was thin enough to make a strong heart labor, and a younger Camille Devereaux moved across a snow saddle under no moon with 3 other people whose lives had been placed by the machinery of nations into her keeping. They were a small element, a deniable element, the kind that is never spoken of afterward and is grieved, when it is grieved at all, in rooms with no windows. The plan had been clean. The plan had been briefed and rehearsed and was, by any honest measure, a good plan. The plan met the ground, and the ground, as it always does, had the final say. Every operation is a promise you make to people who are trusting you with the only lives they have. Some promises you keep. One she did not. A goat track that the imagery had sworn was empty was not empty. There was contact in the dark, sudden and total, the white snow strobing with muzzle flash, and the element broke as it had drilled to break, peeling down off the high ground toward the only covered route of withdrawal. And Devereaux, who was responsible, did the arithmetic that command does in half a second and never forgives itself for, and put herself alone on the high ground to hold the single approach so that the other 3 could go down the backside and live. She counted rounds the way a miser counts coins, because 800 meters of open snow does not forgive a person who runs out. She held the saddle alone for 19 minutes that felt like a single held breath, moving between positions so the dark would think there were more of her, firing only when firing bought the others another 10 meters of distance, and the cold got into the action of her weapon and into the marrow of her, and she kept the saddle anyway. It was on that ridge that a round came across the high ground and opened the seam along her hairline that she would carry, white and thin, for the rest of her life. She wiped the blood out of her eye with the back of a frozen glove and kept counting and kept holding. Nash Coburn was hit on the draw below her. She heard it called up, heard her name in the earpiece, and the word down. And she came off that ridge against every rule and every doctrine and every cold sentence in every manual that said, the mission is the thing, and the dead are the dead, and you do not go back. She went back. She found him in the bottom of the frozen riverbed, with the snow already trying to take him, and she got him onto her shoulders, and she started to walk. 2 miles. 2 miles of frozen draw in the dark, with a grown man's weight across her back, and her own blood freezing on her face. And she talked to him the whole way, low and steady, because the talking kept them both moving, and because she would not let the silence have him. Stay with me, Nash. Stay with me. We are not doing this here. You hear me? Not here. Not tonight. Pick a thing you want for breakfast and tell me about it. Stay with me. He stayed with her for 1.5 miles. He did not stay the last half-mile. By the time she reached the link-up at the end of the draw, where the others waited and the medics ran out to her, there was nothing left in the weight on her back to save, and the medics took him from her shoulders gently. And there was a stillness then that was worse than any sound, the particular stillness of a person who has carried someone 2 miles and arrived with no one to set down. The other 3 lived. That was the arithmetic the manuals would have called a success, and it is a true arithmetic, and she had done it correctly. And 3 families that winter kept their sons because of the 19 minutes she held the saddle alone. She knew that. She had made herself learn to know it, the way you learn to live with a wound that will not fully close. But arithmetic is a cold companion to carry down a frozen draw, and the 3 who lived were not the ones who walked beside her in the bad hours afterward. The one who walked beside her was the one she had set down. The dead are not impressed by your math. They simply keep you company, patient and quiet, and ask nothing, and that is the worst of it. That they ask nothing at all, so that you spend the rest of your years trying to pay a debt that no one is collecting. The silver star they gave her for the ridge says, in the careful empty language those citations use, that she held an exposed position alone, under heavy fire, to enable the withdrawal of her teammates. It is all true, and it says nothing. It doesn't say the part that matters, which is that the call sign they had hung on her in a freezing assessment course years before, Trojan, the thing that gets inside the wall, the thing that comes home from inside the enemy's own ground, had stopped being a joke on that draw and become a promise instead. A promise she keeps making, over and over, to the dead, that she will come out, that she will walk out of the bad country every time, the whole way, on her own feet, and bring as many as she can carry, because she could not bring the one that mattered most. Snow on an unmarked grave half a world away, and a single challenge coin pressed by a gloved hand into ground, too frozen to take it. Back at the wire, in the suspended minute, while the TOC had told them to do nothing and wait, Dane Vickers made the worst choice of a morning made of bad ones. He could not stand it. That was the truth of it. He could not stand being wrong in front of Renfro and the crowd and his own sergeant of the guard, could not stand the way the morning had been taken out of his hands, and the only tool a frightened, proud young man has for a feeling like that is to reassert control over the nearest thing he can reach. The nearest thing he could reach was her. "Nobody told me to release anybody," he said, his voice cracking up out of its register, and he stepped to Devereaux and took her by the upper arm and pulled. "Back in the pen. Now. Until this is sorted." She let him move her. She went where the pull took her, a half step toward the cage, offering no resistance with her body at all. And her free hand, the 2 cuffed hands moving together, came up and closed once around his wrist. It was not a blow. She did not twist or wrench or do any of the things a fighter does. Her hand simply closed, the way a heavy door closes, complete and unhurried and absolutely without give, and it told his entire arm, the bones of it, the nerves of it, the part of a man that knows things before his mind agrees to them, exactly how the next second would go if she decided it should go that way. There was an ocean of restraint in the grip. That was what made it terrible. He could feel, held in the stillness of her hand, the precise measured amount of force she was choosing not to use, and the size of the thing she was choosing not to use was so far past anything he had imagined that his whole body went cold and certain in a single instant. Then she opened her hand and let him go. He had spent the morning deciding she was nothing. Her hand spent 1 second correcting the record, and his body understood the correction long before his pride did. Renfro stopped laughing. He had not decided to stop, It simply stopped, the way noise stops when a roof beam creaks. Sayer did not move, because Sayer knew, watching, that he did not have to move, that the thing was already finished. The other Marines read that single second, perfectly. Bodies are honest, and every body there had just watched one professional show a frightened amateur the floor of a very deep well, and they went still, all of them, the crowd's energy draining out into the cold dirt. "You don't want to do that again," Devereaux said, and her voice was quiet and almost kind, with no triumph in it anywhere. "Not for my sake. For yours. Sit down, Lance Corporal. It's almost over, and you can still be on the right side of how it ends. Sit down." Vickers let go of her arm and stepped back, breathing hard, his hands not steady, the bravado leaking out of him into the ground. And behind them all, in the guard shack, the radio crackled and threw out the short, sharp prefix that precedes a commander's voice, and a sound that had not been heard all morning came over the net. Calm, certain, and senior. The voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed by entire formations. Even the wind seemed to drop to listen to it. "Guard 1, TOC. It was Captain Abernathy again, but formal now, every word squared away. "Authentication is good. I say again, authentication is good. Identity is confirmed. You will release the individual immediately and render all assistance. And stand by. The task force commander is walking out to your position on foot. Colonel Friel is coming to you. Acknowledge." "TOC, Guard 1 acknowledges," Sayer said, and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 11 years, and reached to his belt for the cutters. The inner gate of the compound opened, and a man came through it, without any of the ceremony that usually surrounds a colonel. No entourage, no cover down, no announcement. Just a lean, weathered officer in worn utilities, moving fast across the open ground, with his eyes already searching the wire. Colonel Desmond Friel had run 100 operations, and briefed generals, and buried more people than he let himself count. And the men who served him would have told you that nothing moved the colonel, that the colonel was a flat, calm sea in any storm. He came around the last barrier, and he saw her, and he stopped. It was not the stop of an officer arriving at a scene. It was the stop of one human being who had spent some long nights believing another human being was dead, and was now looking at her, standing in the cold in cut-rate flex cuffs and a dirty blue shirt, alive. Something crossed his face that none of the Marines at that gate had ever seen on a colonel and would never forget. And then he mastered it. And he said the call sign the way you say a word that has weight, that costs something to lift. "Trojan." His voice was not quite steady. "You walked out. 40 kilometers of that. And you walked out. You actually walked out." 40 clicks, Devereaux said, and the smallest dry warmth came into her voice for the first time all morning. "And I'm late for coffee, sir." Friel crossed to her, and then Colonel Desmond Friel, an 06 who outranked every living soul at that gate by a country mile, came to attention in front of a woman in cut flex cuffs and a filthy shirt, and brought his hand up and rendered her a salute. First, before anything else, before the cuffs were even cut, a colonel holding a salute for the analyst the gate had filmed in a cage. "Guard, attention!" Sayer barked, and the watch snapped to, boots together, and the chain-link door of the empty pen stood open and rattling softly behind her in the wind. A colonel held a salute for a woman the gate had filmed in a cage, and every man who had laughed that morning learned the exact weight of the thing they had mocked. And Dane Vickers' face, in the space of 4 seconds, traveled the entire distance a face can travel. First, confusion. Why is the colonel saluting the analyst? Why is the gunny standing at attention? What is happening? Then, disbelief, a hard refusal. This is not happening. This cannot be the thing it plainly is. Then recognition, arriving all at once and from below, the way cold water arrives, the frequency, the authentication, the priority flag, the calm, the wrists offered clean to the cuff, the turn of her face out of the camera, she told me. She told me the whole time, in plain words, kindly, and I drew a weapon on her. And then, last, horror, pure and total, as the full architecture of the morning assembled itself in his mind, and he understood, finally, completely, what he had spent it doing. Friel's eyes left her, and found Vickers, and went to Winter. "Lance Corporal," the colonel's voice did not rise, which made it worse. "You cuffed a ground branch officer at my wire. You put her in a cage. You drew a weapon on her on a recorded net. You are going to want to be standing somewhere very specific and very silent when I am finished here. And you are going to want a better answer, ready than the one I can see you reaching for." Devereaux lifted her bound wrists toward the colonel's salute, an almost gentle motion, stopping it. "He held his post, sir," she said, loud enough for the whole gate to hear it. "He was wrong about one person. He wasn't wrong about the job." She turned her head and looked at the white scar at her own hairline's worth of memory, and then back at Friel. "Hold the salute for the man I carried. Not for me. I told you. I always come out. It's the coming out that doesn't deserve the salute. It's the staying in. The consequences came for Vickers fast, and they came from his own chain, which is the only place consequences that teach a man, instead of merely breaking him, can come from." Friel cut the flex cuffs from Devereaux's wrists himself, with Sayer's cutters, and handed the cut plastic to Sayer, without looking at it, the way you hand off something you do not want to think about. Then he turned the lance corporal over to the man who owned him, the Guard Force platoon sergeant, summoned at a run from the TOC, and to Gunnery Sergeant Sayer, and he gave an order about the boy that the boy would spend the rest of his enlistment trying to deserve. "He's yours," Friel said to the platoon sergeant. Relieved from post, formal statement, the recorded net pulled and reviewed, all of it. But hear me. I want him taught, not buried. There is a difference between teaching a young Marine and ending him, and your Corps is the best in the world at the first one. So you will do the first one. Are we clear? "Crystal, sir," the platoon sergeant said. And Renfro, who had only laughed, who had coined the name and held up no weapon but had handed his friend the audience that made the whole thing possible, got the quietest and most withering version of the lecture of his life from Sayer, delivered in 6 sentences at a range of 1 foot, and went gray under it, and learned in that single minute more about what a uniform is for than a year of training had taught him. Then Devereaux stopped the worst of it. She walked over to Friel and the platoon sergeant where they stood over the relieved boy, and she spoke low, but she did not bother to keep the Marines from hearing, because she wanted them to hear. "Don't end him over me," she said. "Look at me. I have buried better men than I will ever be. I carried one of them 2 miles, and got there with nothing left to set down. And I have spent 12 years since deciding who lives with what. And I am telling you, that boy is not a thing to throw away. He held a gate in a war against an unknown that walked up out of the dark, and he got one person wrong. Teach him the rest of it. That's the whole punishment I want. Teach him the rest of it, and let him carry that instead. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault, and let this story find the people who'll understand it." Friel looked at her for a long moment, and whatever passed between the two of them was older than the gate, and older than the morning, and he nodded once. The day burned off. The mountains went from white to gold, to the deep blue of a desert dusk, and the FOB settled into its evening rhythm, and at the ragged edge of the camp, away from the lights, there was a small memorial board nailed up out of plywood and 2x4 sorks, the kind that grows on every long-held base. Names written in paint pen by whoever knew them, fallen of a dozen units who had passed through this ground across the years of the war. Devereaux found her way to it in the last light, washed now, fed, in clean borrowed clothes, the cut place at her wrists already forgotten. She found Nash Coburn's name where someone, long ago, on some rotation she had never known about, had added it to the board in small, careful letters, because the war is smaller than it looks, and the dead travel with the living who remember them. She stood in front of the name for a while. Then she took a single challenge coin out of her pocket. Worn smooth, its markings nearly gone. And she set it on the narrow plywood ledge beneath his name, the way she had once pressed a coin into frozen ground, too hard to take it. The two moments rhyming across 12 years and half a world. She did not hear Vickers come up behind her. Sayer had sent him with a canteen and a hot meal in a paper sack, not telling him why, only telling him where she was, and that he would carry the food to her, and that this was not a punishment, but the beginning of an education. The boy stopped a respectful pace behind her and did not speak, because some part of him had finally learned that there are moments a man does not fill with his own voice. She spoke without turning around. His name was Nash Coburn, she said. He was 28. He liked terrible coffee and worse jokes, and he had a kid he never met. I carried him 2 miles in the snow, and I talked to him the whole way, and he died on the last half mile. And the reason I let a boy with a flex cuff put me in a cage this morning and never lifted a hand, you want to know the reason. It wasn't a question. Because the man whose name that is would have wanted me to come home quiet. He'd have wanted me to come in soft, make no trouble, let it sort itself out, and go home. So that's what I do now. I come home quiet. For him. She set her hand flat on the wood beneath the name for a moment. You'll understand it someday, Lance Corporal. Maybe not for years. But you'll be standing somewhere, and it'll arrive, and you'll understand the whole of it at once. She turned then and looked at him, and there was no anger left in her anywhere, only the enormous patience of a person who has decided, long ago, what she will spend her life carrying. Stand easy, she said. Eat something. Go back to your post in the morning and be better than you were at it today. That's all anyone's asking. That's all anyone ever asked of me. Dane Vickers came to attention on his own, without being told, and held it, and this time, there was nothing performed in it at all. He held it the way you hold a thing you have only just understood the meaning of, and his eyes were wet, and he did not look away. Camille Devereaux nodded to him once, and then she turned and walked toward the lights of the TOC she had spent the whole morning trying to reach, unhurried, on her own 2 feet, the way she always came out of the bad country. And the boy stayed at the board a while longer in the gathering dark, reading the names, all of them, one after another, learning the only lesson that the wire and the cage and the salute had been trying all day to teach him. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.